مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. الصين هي الدولة الأكثر ازدحاما بالسكان في العالم. يسيطر عليها الشيوعيون، وأما قريب ستصير صاحبة أكبر اقتصاد في العالم، وتقودها طموحات لأن تكون أعظم قوة سياسية وعسكرية في العالم كذلك. طوال العام الماضي دارت حرب بين الولايات المتحدة والصين، ليست حربا بالأسلحة والرصاص، وإنما حرب تكاد تكون فتاكة بنفس الدرجة، حرب تجارية. من سينتصر؟ هل هذه حرب يمكن أن يخسرها الطرفان؟ لمناقشة المنافسة الاقتصادية بين أميركا والصين في عهد إدارة ترامب، يسرني أن أرحب باللجنة التي تضم خبيرين جيمس أستيل وبيتر موريتشي. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. They are the two largest economies in the world, America and China, and they are at loggerheads. Are they in a trade war? To discuss this, I'm delighted to be joined today by James Astil and Peter Morici. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here. Well, that's the basic question. The United States and China, are they in a trade war today? James?
Well, they're certainly in a very spiky trade negotiation. I don't think, I think we would be reluctant to call it a war, but the spiky negotiation is premised on an idea that if they don't negotiate to America's satisfaction, America having started this, the Trump administration having started this this argument, then a trade war would ensue. I think if the next ramp up of American tariffs would constitute something more serious than what we have now.
And Peter, would you characterize what the current situation is as a trade war?
Absolutely. I think we were in a trade war before Donald Trump acted. It's just that only the Chinese were shooting. They were stealing our intellectual property, freezing out our investment, subsidizing exports in a manner that even the French wouldn't do. And they were freezing us out in the way the Japanese would never conceive of doing. So it was really sort of a one-way trade war.
So if it's, James says it's more of a dispute, and you say it's a war, wars have a goal. What's the objective of this war?
Well, China's objective is to be the dominant economic power on the planet, to use the trade surplus to build up its military, to basically supplant the United States and its hegemony, or however you want to call it, and to basically export its system of autocratic capitalism. We are at a crucial point in history. Does Donald Trump blink?
All right, that's a pretty serious set of charges. James, would you characterize the dispute that way?
No, I don't think so. I think that Peter's right that China is clearly abusing the opportunity that it's been given to make use of the American guaranteed trading system to the extent that it does. It's abused the system consistently in ways that the Trump administration is now pushing back at with broad support across American politics. That's the most unusual thing about this row from the American side. But I think that China is still more concerned about political stability, is more concerned about catch-up and its ability to withstand its perceived, perhaps fictitious, foreign threats to China's internal stability, to the rule of the party. I don't think it's thinking about global dominance yet. But on a more localized basis, yes, of course, it's pushing back at American hegemony. So I'm sort of, I understand the contours of Peter's argument. I wouldn't go that far.
Well, I think we have to look at Chinese behavior. I mean, they, through a surrogate state now, pose a nuclear threat to the American West Coast.
You're referring to North Korea? Is
North Korea, yes. They enabled North Korea, and if the Chinese wanted to, those nuclear weapons would go away. They have built a blue water navy, and they're extending their foreign policy influence into Africa and all the way to Latin America. I mean, they are substantially enabling the regime in Venezuela, and to the extent they can, they're investing elsewhere in Latin America. My feeling is that we've always heard this reply. from people who are steeped in Chinese history that China has never been an expansionist power. It's never looked to broaden, to extend itself outward. Well, that's just not consistent with the behavior of China over the last 20 years and its words. And its words. I can remember in the days just before we granted them access to the WTO.
The World Trade Organization.
Correct. And that they were, having a hard time with us in negotiations. We didn't accept the first deal. And the premier at the time said, don't worry, soon we will be making the rules. As the world looks on, I know that Donald Trump is not the most sympathetic personality. However, Donald Trump is a temporal figure. I think that as the world looks on and asks itself about American behavior right now, they should ask themselves, do they really want the Chinese making the rules? A society where prisoners are executed to harvest their organs for transplant to party officials, where the Western provinces with Muslim majorities have been turned into virtual concentration camps, where a social credit system is being put in place to monitor the behavior in real time and the movements in real time of just about every citizen, where a jaywalking violation could cause you not to get housing or to enroll your child in an exclusive school. It sounds to me a lot like the kinds of regime with modern artificial intelligence that were being run in fascist Europe.
All right, so Peter is outlining a situation which is much bigger than just a trade dispute or a trade war, but something on multi-levels and all aspects of international relations and contrary political systems. Is that the way that we should view the situation between?
No, there's no evidence for a number of Peter's assumptions. We don't know. Nobody fully understands outside China, outside a small room in Beijing where the Politburo meets, exactly what the Chinese hold on the North Korean regime is. We know that they have influence. We still haven't explored the extent of that leverage or relationship. Now, you may be right, we don't know. But the danger of taking such a maximalist view of China's ambitions are that you exhaust too quickly the possibilities of getting the relationship back on a more realistic footing within the current architecture, rules-based system. And I think that what the Trump administration has done thus far, setting aside some of the president's usual histrionics, is push back in a broadly sensible way to see if China can be corrected, to see if the relationship can be put onto a more constructive, fairer, if you like, footing broadly within the rules-based system. Now, the danger of second-guessing the Chinese and their motivations and ambitions to the extent that you do is that you throw all that away and go nuclear on the relationship, pardon the unfortunate pun, much sooner than you should think about doing. So, I mean, to bring the conversation back to what the administration is doing, I think we need to see more of this on a sustained basis. The danger, I think, is not that the Trump administration goes too far, as I think in a way that you might be advising them to do, but actually that they do too little.
Just let me ask just 1 second, because we're going to go to the specifics of the American pushback. I just want to ask you very quickly, Peter, you recently wrote in an op-ed piece, and I quote, President Xi Jinping and his predecessor have repeatedly demonstrated China's word is as worthless as those of German leaders during the 1930s. Are you comparing China today with the Nazis?
I have, and I have on repeated circumstances. My feeling is that it is a very similar economic system. So if we want to keep things on the plane of economics, I'm willing to do that.
It's not just economics, it's diplomacy.
Right, on the plane of economics and diplomacy, as opposed to, say, grand strategic scheme and what have you, which I think would be more appropriate. But if we want to keep it on your plane, then I have to ask ourselves, is it possible to interface them with the Western economic system in the manner just described? And I would suggest to you, it's probably not. My feeling is we can draw up a list of things that we just won't let the Chinese do and come down very hard with very punitive sanctions if they do. For example, we have been kind of lax when it comes to their intellectual property theft. We could come down a lot harder and more broadly when they do it and pretty well bring it to an end. Just make it too costly, okay? So that can be done. But if you're going to talk about interfacing a non-market economy, basically a state-planned economy, or state-directed, state-planned is too strong, with a system of economies that is on a broad, continuum of market economies. France is a market economy. It is not directed from the center the way that the Chinese economy is. Then I don't think it's possible to do that. And the whole focus has been to somehow or other make the Chinese adhere to their 2002 WTO accession agreement when it comes to investment and things like that.
We're going to come back after the break and ask, why isn't that World Trade Organization accession agreement good enough to control and police Chinese behavior? In just a moment. Our guests today include Peter Morici. Peter is Emeritus Professor at the University of Maryland's Smith School of Business, a recognized expert on economic policy and international economics. He served as Chief Economist at the U.S. International Trade Commission. He has lectured at more than 100 institutions, from Columbia to the Harvard Business School to Oxford University. Sitting to his left is James Astill. James is the Washington bureau chief and Lexington columnist for The Economist, perhaps the world's most sophisticated and well-informed news magazine. James has been with The Economist for more than a decade, serving as South Asia bureau chief based in Delhi, then as energy and environment editor based in London. Delighted to have you both to talk about this very important foreign policy challenge. Now, it's a bit complicated for our viewers, but it's a very important question. There was a lot of policy excitement when China joined the World Trade Organization. So let me ask you about that fundamental question of good intentions. What do you say to the argument that fundamentally the United States is interested in the success of the Chinese economy so that they are a peaceful actor from whom the United States can borrow till the end of time, just as the China is interested in America's success so that we will pay back all those billions of loans, as opposed to the idea that we are fundamentally at odds with each other? James?
Well, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. There's no doubt that American policy has been informed by a desire for China to prosper so that American companies can prosper, so American goods can be on sale and so American imports can be cheap, so Americans can get lots of cheap stuff to compensate perhaps for their sluggish wage growth. That's been the history of the last 20 years, and there's no doubt been a blithe complacency about China's unwillingness to accommodate itself to the normal rules of the game that America expected it to, which is why we've now reached this crunch point, maybe even a crisis point. I think that the degree to which China has wanted America to prosper, so it would be good for its debt, has not really arisen, because America has not looked like it was in any danger of economic or political meltdown, maybe until very recently. But I think that the question right now is whether that basic understanding that there is a mutual interest in economic progress can survive a more confrontational geopolitical footing, which is now inevitable, it seems. My suspicion is that the two will ameliorate each other, so we will have this sort of strange contradiction where there will be both conflict and mutual interest in a way that there wasn't to anything like the same degree during the Cold War, but we'll have to see.
And Peter, you don't think there is a mutual interest here?
Oh, I think there is a mutual interest, but I think it requires the Chinese to come to a realization that it exists. The tariffs really aren't that big so far. They're just not. And the Chinese, though, and this is very dangerous, is the Chinese are blaming the tariffs for their slumping economy. And when the tariffs go away, the fundamental structural problems that exist in China will continue. Then China will have a crisis. It's going to take that crisis to bring about reforms. My feeling is that China has to go through an economic crisis, and you have to have a different leader so that China will start to see the kinds of potential benefits of mutual growth. Right now, it sees this as a zero-sum game. We got to get ahead of we have to catch up with the Americans, get ahead of the Americans, export our system. That's what we need to do to survive. I mean, it's not lending all that money all over the world for no reason at all. My feeling is it has to start to see its own internal need to reform and to see us in more sympathetic terms.
James, how does this end?
I think in the short term, the president will blink. I think that he doesn't have the stomach for the sustained geopolitical fight that he said that he had. I think that the rarity, and I disagree with Peter fundamentally on this, I think that the rarity of this standoff is how different it is from all the other standoffs that this president has provoked, because I think there is broad bipartisan and sectoral support for this more confrontational attitude towards the Chinese. I think that the support from the business community, remarkably considering the tariff regime that the president, that's the only tool that he really favors. So I think that he could pursue this fight, but he won't, because he'll worry about the economic effects in America as he starts to contemplate re-election, and because he's just because he's facing a lot of political heat for other reasons right now, he's desperate to claim a triumph, and we know that he tends to see triumph in whatever he can consider to be triumph.
So you believe that
it's not a facts-based
President Trump will
administration.
declare victory?
So in the short term, I think he'll declare victory and move on, and an opportunity will have been lost actually to see how far reasonable confrontation can take us towards putting the relationship onto a more productive and fairer footing. Now, the interesting question is whether, if you like, this stuttering phase of sort of promised and curtailed sort of failed confrontation makes a more serious pushback more likely under a future administration, Republican or Democrat. And I think maybe it will, but I think a little bit of a Rubicon has been crossed in terms of the rhetoric that we've heard in Congress from both parties on the Chinese over the last year and a half, and from the business community, which is novel. So I think that something serious will survive.
So, and Peter, do you think this is just phase one? President Trump declares victory, ends the fight for us to fight another day, or is this really the opening phase of a true war with the Chinese economically?
My feeling is that we're entering a Cold War with China in a variety of dimensions. This is probably the epicenter of it. My feeling is that Donald Trump will blink, that he really doesn't himself understand the gravity of what is going on. It's another one of his foreign policy blind spots. However, I'd point out to you, the last four people that ran for president, Barack Obama, Mr. Romney, Ms. Clinton, and President Trump, all ran on get tough with China. Three of them, other than Obama, said they were going to impose a 25% tariff. So there is this broad notion in Washington that something should be done. Out in the country, it depends on which industry you talk to. Wall Street bankers are largely interested in making money, and they see this as threatening to their ability to make money in China. So Mnuchin, who represents the bankers in the administration, is always counseling appeasement.
Unusually, there's a Chinese company that has been on the front pages of almost every American newspaper recently, Huawei. What is so special about this company, and why is it making headlines? All right, Peter?
Well, Huawei is a critical technology company. It's a lot of American companies wrapped up into one, but the reality is it's very important in the West for supplying backbone to the internet. And it's on the verge of basically building out 5G in Western countries. And that creates a broad possibility for spying, for the theft of intellectual property and so forth. And Huawei has always projected itself as being, well, not part of the Chinese government, and really just almost like a Western company. What turns out Huawei is being run by a bunch of thieves. They were giving out bonuses to employees if they would find ways to steal American patents and intellectual property and designs and so forth. So given its critical place and given its now revealed behavior, it's the poster child of what's wrong with China. Basically, China's a kleptocracy. It's not just the Communist Party that's a problem. The whole bloody private sector is into stealing. That's what it's coming across as.
And so this company is the poster child for everything that's wrong, or what some people accuse everything is wrong.
And if it isn't, the media will turn it into.
It was supposed to be everything that's right and zesty and like us about Chinese growth, and it turns out that it has more than a few of the problems that we fear about Chinese growth.
All right. Thank you so much for explaining this, this poster child for Chinese misbehavior in the global economic system.
Thank you.
I would really love for the middle, I'd like for compromise to come back into style. I'd like for people to sit down and talk without yelling at each other, not be so partisan, and really to be able to just find common ground.
About 7 years ago, I took my family on a trip to China. It was fascinating. We saw the most remarkable acrobats in the world, ate the tastiest dumplings, walked along remote parts of the Great Wall, and were amazed at the terracotta warriors of Xi'an. But if one memory stands out from this memorable trip, it was the day we visited Tiananmen Square, at the site where ordinary people decided to speak up and speak out against an autocratic regime. We were visited with Big Brother messaging on our cell phones. "Welcome to Tiananmen Square," the text said to us, unprompted on our phones, reminding us that somewhere, someone was watching our every move. Then, one of my sons saw a sign that said, "No ball playing allowed." And unprompted, my kids decided to strike a blow for freedom. They took a ball from a backpack and started to toss it around. In retrospect, it was silly, just an American family throwing a ball around in the middle of Tiananmen Square, something that we would take for granted in the middle of Central Park or the National Mall. But with everyone looking at us as though we were from Mars, standing up for the simple joys of freedom was something that I will never forget. If you're a regular viewer of this show, you'll know that I don't always agree with the president. From immigration policy to the government shutdown, I've been able to restrain my enthusiasm. But there is something about his trade fight with China that I can appreciate. Perhaps it's too much too fast. Perhaps it's not the right mix of tariffs. And I'm certain that I disagree with canceling the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would have opened U.S. trade across Asia. But the idea that the United States has a direct face-off with China over its predatory trading practices, its theft of intellectual property, its violations of U.S. sanctions law, it has a certain logic. I appreciate the fact that America and China are tethered at the hip in today's global economy, that China needs America to succeed if it stands a chance of getting its billions in loans repaid, and that America needs China to succeed if it needs to take out even more loans. But every now and then, you need to step back and level the playing field. If cool heads prevail, admittedly, a big if, both sides just might emerge from all this with the success the other side needs. بهذا نصل لنهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول احتمال نشوب نزاع بين أمريكا والصين، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ Inside Washington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل، وإلى أن ألقاكم شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.